My name is Rebecca, and today I'll be talking about a concept called counterplans. Now, a counterplan is an argument that you make when you're on the negative. So, I'm assuming that you know what a plan is, which is just something that the affirmative advocates. A counterplan is like the opposite of that. It's something that the negative advocates that they think is a better idea than the plan. A counterplan can also be thought of as an opportunity cost to doing the affirmative. So, a trade-off, or the best possible option that you could have done, which you now can't do because you did the affirmative plan. So here's an example. Suppose that I'm trying to decide whether or not to see a movie, to go see the new Avengers movie, or to go to the ice skating rink during my lunch break. So if I'm the affirmative, I would say, my plan is to go see the Avengers movie. And then the counterplan is, no, Rebecca, you should go to the ice skating rink instead, because you'll get a lot of exercise and you won't get fat eating popcorn and you can be graceful and play around on ice. So that's the affirmative and that's the counterplan. Now the reason why this is a trade-off to doing the plan of seeing a movie is because I only have 2 hours in my lunch break, so I can only do one or the other. The reason why that concept is important, the fact that a counterplan has to be a trade-off, is because of something called competition. Now, competition is simply asking the question, is it possible to do both the plan and the counterplan at the same time? And if you're negative, you want to argue that since the counterplan has competition, since the counterplan is competitive with the AF, it is not in fact possible to do both at the same time. Now I'm going to go over the components of a counterplan so you have a checklist when you're writing them. And then after that, we'll discuss some of the most common types of counterplans. So first, when you're writing a counterplan, you want to have a text. And if you've ever written a plan, a counterplan text is the same thing as a plan text. It's just a couple sentences describing what the counterplan does. Next, you probably want to have a solvency advocate, or an author, preferably someone who has qualifications in the relevant field, preferably not someone who's just writing on a random blog or is posting in the comments section of HuffPost. You want to have someone who thinks that the counterplan is a good idea and then describes what the counterplan does. And then you want to have net benefits to the counterplan. Now, net benefits can either be reasons why the counterplan is a good idea and better than the AF, or why doing the affirmative would be a bad idea, so we should just do the counterplan instead. For example, some net benefits of the ice skating counterplan are Rebecca will get really fit. Rebecca will look beautiful on ice and be able to take many lovely selfies. Some net benefits that might be disadvantages to the plan are the Avengers movie is terrible and Rebecca will have a terrible time. So to avoid that disadvantage, she should just go ice skating instead. Although the Avengers movie was amazing, so that is not a true argument. So those are the three components of a counterplan. Now we're going to talk about some of the most common forms of counterplans. And the first type that I like to read a lot are called PICs, which stands for Plan Inclusive Counterplans. And what this means is that the counterplan does most of the affirmative, but not all of it. So an example of the lunch break counterplan that is a PIC might be, Rebecca should go see the Avengers movie, but should not eat popcorn while she's there. And that's a PIC because it does almost all of the original plan, because I'm still going to go see the movie. So this counterplan gets to co-opt any of the benefits of seeing Avengers. But it avoids the disadvantage of getting fat from eating a lot of popcorn. Now the reason why people don't like PICs is because they argue that it might be theoretically abusive. So for example, if you've got a plan that implements some form of policy, presumably you're prepared to debate all the merits of that policy. But if your opponent is just conceding that that policy is good and nitpicking over some very small part of that policy, it can be pretty frustrating to be AF because a large majority of your offense is gone by the 1AR. However, I tend to think that most PICs are theoretically legitimate because if you're reading this affirmative, you should be able to defend all parts of the affirmative. So that's a PIC. A second type of counterplan is called an advantage counterplan. And this is when the negative debater is reading a policy option that solves back for one of the advantages of the AF. Now, it might not be a counterplan that does all of the affirmative or that has the same solvency mechanism as the affirmative, but something that just solves back for the same thing that the AF is trying to solve back for. So suppose the plan is I should go see the Avengers movie because I want to be more culturally literate. A counterplan might be I should just go to a comic book store and read all the Marvel comics because that will also make me very culturally literate. So it solves back for the cultural literacy advantage. All right, a third type of counterplan is an agent counterplan. And these are fun because they use a different actor than the affirmative. So suppose in the original plan, I am the actor. I am the one who's going to the movies. A counterplan might be Daniel should go see the Avengers instead because Daniel actually likes the Marvel franchise and would have a lot more fun. This is not true because I am the biggest Marvel fan, but that's just what an agent CP is. And this is really popular with like international topics. So there are counterplans that say, oh no, NATO should do the plan instead, or the UN should do the plan instead. Now, an example of why an agent counterplan might be beneficial is something like, so suppose the AF has President Obama passing a policy action, and the neg says the disadvantage to this is a politics disad, because Obama will expend his political capital, and then terrible things will happen, and he won't be able to pass some other form of policy. Now, an agent counterplan might be that the courts should pass the plan instead. That's tricky because I'm not like judicial activism is a thing, and I'm not sure how courts would do the same thing as Obama because of separation of powers. But regardless, suppose that you wrote a counterplan that said that the courts could somehow, the Supreme Court could somehow pass a ruling that results in the same effects as this plan that Obama was originally going to pass. Then that shields the link to politics because like Kennedy doesn't care about his political capital. Scalia definitely doesn't care about his political capital. And in this scenario, Obama doesn't have to do anything because the Supreme Court has taken care of everything for him. So that's an agent counterplan. All right, so now I'm going to quickly talk about some ways to answer counterplans. This is how to read them, but how should we answer counterplans? And there are three main strategies. The first is to argue that the counterplan is not competitive, or that it is possible to do both the AF and the counterplan at the same time. And this is called a permutation, or simply a perm. So if you were giving the 1AR, you would say simply, first, perm. The counterplan is not competitive because Rebecca actually has like a 4-hour lunch break because the company that she works for is awesome, and that she could both go see the Avengers and go ice skating. So if you prove that it's possible to do both the counterplan and the AF, you get to co-opt the benefits of both. The second argument you should make is a solvency deficit. And this is an argument very similar to solvency deficits against a plan that says, no, the counterplan can't solve. So for example, going to the Marvel store to read comics can't solve back for the cultural literacy advantage because there are so many Marvel comics and they exist in so many different alternate timelines that Rebecca will become helplessly confused and exit the store even less culturally literate than she already was. So that's an example of a solvency deficit against this advantage counterplan that we just talked about. Finally, you can argue that there's a disad to the counterplan, or that the counterplan actually resolves in something that is proactively bad. Like, if Rebecca goes ice skating, then she is absolutely going to trip and twist her ankle because she actually doesn't know how to ice skate. So she should definitely not do that and go to the movies instead, because then she would emerge from her lunch break intact and healthy. And generally, if you can make at least one of each type of these arguments in the 1AR against a counterplan, you're pretty solid.